In Tokyo in 2013, an underperforming salaryman was fired by his supervisor, who then pushed the supervisor in front of a moving train. As the supervisor falls onto the tracks, time stops and he hears the voice of a self-proclaimed god coming from the people at the station, demanding the supervisor acknowledge him as God. The supervisor asserts his opinion that the being is not God and names it Being X. Being X comes to the conclusion that the salaryman lacks faith in him because he does not live in circumstances that would require him to have faith, and decides to reincarnate the unrepentant supervisor in an alternate 1913-era Europe, where he would potentially face enough troubles that he would have no choice but to have faith in Being X. Tanya grows up in a poorly funded orphanage in Buran, where it is discovered by routine tests that she has an exceedingly high magical aptitude. Tanya decides to enlist in the Imperial Army, where she believes she would fare better as an orphan in wartime. She performs well and is entrusted with training new cadets at a military academy, but is ruthless and unforgiving to her students, much to Rurugin's horror. In 1923, a 9-year-old Tanya was operating as an artillery observer at the Northern Theater Force garrison during the initial invasion of the Empire by the Entente. Led by Lieutenant Colonel Anson Su of the Entente, leads a company of the 5th Aerial Mage Battalion after Tanya, who is ordered to stay and delay them, which Tanya does so at great injury to herself. Back at the garrison headquarters, Tanya is awarded the Silver Wings Assault Badge and hopes she isn't sent to the front lines. Instead, she is dressed up and lauded as a hero of the Empire. To Tanya's great relief, after recovering from her injuries, she was assigned to the Tactical Instructor Squad away from the front. She tests a new type of computation jewel, a device necessary for mages to perform magic, the Elenum Type 95. But this proves to be as dangerous as fighting on the front lines due to the extreme instability of the Type 95. Chief Development Engineer Adelheid von Schugel pushes her to her limits but is unable to make the Type 95 sufficiently stable. After criticizing the technology, she requests a transfer which is approved, and then the project is frozen. That night, Being X animates the Nutcracker doll and accuses Tanya of not having developed any faith or insight, but Tanya disagrees with Being X and destroys the toy. She wakes up the next day and assumes it was a dream. Tanya participates in one more experiment and, just like the Type 95, is about to explode. Being X performs a miracle and stabilizes the jewel to prove his power to Tanya. As a result, the Type 95 is now usable only by Tanya, and greatly amplifies her power when used, on the condition that she prays to Being X. She views this as a curse. Headquarters decides to send her to officer training, and she recommends Victoria for officer training as well. Meanwhile, Headquarters realizes the necessity of a rapid response unit in the Imperial Army. 6 months after leaving the front lines, Tanya is still training to be an officer at a military academy, and is doing well in her studies. She meets General Zator in the academy's library, and he asks for her opinion on the war. She predicts that it will become a world war and outlines a strategy for the Empire, using the firepower and agility of mages to minimize military losses. He is impressed by her battle knowledge and ideas and asks for a report, which she sees as an opportunity for career advancement. Later, Tanya meets Captain Uger, one of her academy rivals, in a cafe. Uger reveals to Tanya that he is more concerned about his family than the war, and about the future impact the war will have on his daughter, whom he fears may one day be forced to fight. Tanya is able to emotionally manipulate him to drop out of the academy in exchange for a safer line of work, securing her position as one of the elite students at the academy. Tanya's plan is passed to General Kurt von Rudesworf by Zetor. At a conference held at the Imperial Strategic Headquarters, Zetor tables Tanya's plan for a rapid response mage battalion, which is accepted. At the Western Theater garrison, Rurugin is furious when he learns that Tanya's plan has been implemented with her in command of the Rapid Reaction Force. Tanya is invited to dinner with the colonel, where she is put in charge of a new 48-strong Rapid Response Mage battalion and will be promoted to the rank of captain. Much to her horror, this will actually be more dangerous than fighting on the front lines. She tries to find ways to delay the implementation of the battalion, especially after a large number of applications for the battalion are received. But a newly promoted Victoria is assigned to assist her, thus preventing Tanya from further delaying the information of their battalion. Tanya holds a test to decide whether or not the mages who have sent their applications are worthy of joining the new battalion, but most fail, resulting in a low recruitment rate, leading to her superiors complaining that her standards are set too high. Tanya accepts this compromise to accept more lower standard mages and declares that she will bring all the mages to an acceptable standard in just a month. She is granted free rein on how to go about it. She holds a grueling training regimen, with many nearly dying, which she hopes will deter them from further training. But the mages are instead frightened that dropping out will incur even worse punishment, and decide to continue. Some are even inspired to meet her lofty standards. Within a month, they had been successfully transformed into skilled soldiers, even by Tanya's standards. She then receives instructions to go with her battalion, named the 203rd Aerial Mage Battalion or Pixie Battalion, to the Grand Duchy of Daika, which has mobilized its troops and crossed the imperial borders. There, the first battle the 203rd encounters is totally in their favor. The Dakians have no mages and still use techniques for outdated forms of warfare, even lacking the capability for even the most basic of anti-aircraft operations. The Dakian attack was repelled with ease by the 203rd, resulting in massive Dakian casualties. Tanya commands the 203rd to follow her to the Dakian capital to test their combat prowess, leaving the remainder of the Dakian invasion force to regular Imperial forces. There, they locate the Republic-backed Carbelius Arms factory, which is undefended from aerial attack. Tanya orders the 203rd to attack it, but in accordance with international law, they can only destroy the factory if they have declared their intentions in advance, allowing for armed retaliation. This would give away the 203rd's surprise advantage. However, Tanya uses a childlike voice to broadcast her intentions to destroy the factory over the radio, which is dismissed by factory workers as a harmless child's prank, allowing the 203rd to completely destroy the factory. The 203rd, satisfied with their overwhelming success, returns to base. The Imperial headquarters concludes that Imperial troops should be able to completely occupy Daika by winter and turns their attention to the fact that the Empire is still fighting on two fronts, against the Entente and the Republic. They decide to focus their efforts on destroying the Entente first, but are worried there will not be sufficient supplies to do so, with there only being enough to last the Imperial army through winter. Finally, an order is sent for the 203rd to transfer to Norden against the Entente. Later, Tanya and Victoria discuss the possibility of the Entente being allied to the Republic and/or the Allied Kingdom, analogous to the United Kingdom, which is later shown to be true. Tanya realizes that Being X may be orchestrating the upcoming World War in order to force a situation wherein she would have no choice but to worship him. At Norden, the Viper Battalion fights against the attacking Entente forces, but faces heavy losses. The 203rd comes in just in time to rescue the Viper Battalion and launch a counterattack. When offered to be reinforced by additional Imperial Army units, Tanya turns the offer down, to create a reputation for the 203rd. She chooses to go after enemy bombers, leaving the rest of the 203rd to carry out the attack. After downing a flight of bombers and landing to look for survivors, Being X once again stops time, animates a dead Entente soldier, and asks Tanya how it feels to fight a war against the whole world. Tanya shoots Being X's avatar down and later eradicates a hidden Allied Kingdom observation post that was gathering data on her. At Paris, Lieutenant Colonel Zavren Bantot informs General Pierre Michelet Lugo of the failure of the Entente's attacks and of Republican mage casualties, advising him to refrain from sending more Republican mages to assist the Entente. However, Lugo refuses, seemingly under the influence of Being X. In the Entente Ministry of Defense, it is revealed that Anson Su has been promoted to colonel, but is worried about dying and leaving his wife and daughter, Mary Sue, behind. At Port Onelus, Colonel Su bids farewell to his family as he leaves for his post at the relatively quiet Orsay Fjord, located far from the front. Sometime later, he discovers that he has received a rifle from his daughter as an early Christmas present. Meanwhile, at the Imperial Army's Northern Theater Command Strategy Conference, Tanya proposes a strategic retreat, thus shortening supply lines for retreating Imperial forces, allowing the Imperial Army to resupply and making it easier for them to launch an offensive in spring. She asserts that while the retreat would continue the war, an offensive at this moment would exhaust the Imperial Army in Norden, thus limiting its effectiveness. Despite this, it was decided that an offensive would be carried out regardless of the potential losses. Afterwards, during a conversation with Rurigan and Rudersdorf, she deduces that the offensive's main purpose is to be a diversion for Imperial forces to launch an amphibious offensive at the rear of the enemy. Rudersdorf decides to send the 203rd to launch a surprise attack on the heavily defended Orsay Fjord in advance of their North Sea fleet. During the attack, the 203rd is intercepted by a battalion-sized unit of mages led by Colonel Su. Tanya leads the first company in intercepting enemy mages, while the second and third companies destroy the defensive cannons located along the coast, allowing the fleet to land and take control of the railroads, in turn allowing Imperial forces to take over the port. Su's mages are devastated by the first company. In the final confrontation, Tanya bayonets Su, who falls into the sea. Tanya recovers Su's rifle and claims it as her own. Biento and the Republican Army's 2nd Mages Company support a rebel uprising in Arene City against Imperial occupiers. This is a problem because the Arene rebels now control the large railroad that passes through the Arene, which is straining Imperial supply lines. The 203rd is ordered to intercept and destroy all resistance, even if it means civilian casualties. They find the city heavily defended. However, Strategic Command has a plan to rapidly suppress the Arene rebellion, as in accordance with international law, should a city not be evacuated after an evacuation order, all remaining people in that city will be treated as enemy soldiers. After a fierce attack by the 203rd, battered Republican mages seek shelter in a building. Following a refusal to surrender or evacuate, the 203rd observes the murder of a captured Imperial soldier by Arene rebels, providing a casus belli for retaliation. Arene comes under sustained attack from Imperial artillery, causing countless civilian deaths. The Republican mages are driven off completely and control of the Arene is returned to the Empire. Second Lieutenant Varun Grant refuses to open fire on the Arene rebels, but Tanya pressures him into doing so. At Strategic Headquarters, Zetor reveals to Rurugan that the idea for the destruction of Arene actually came from a thesis written by Tanya that details methods to circumvent international laws on city bombardment. At an Allied Kingdom hospital, the critically wounded Colonel Su slowly recovers from his encounter with Tanya and says that God told him to destroy the devil. Some days after the battle at Arene, Tanya meets Major Uger from the Academy, who tells her of a plan to withdraw Imperial forces from the Rhine to draw Republican forces into a trap, Operation Revolving Door, consisting of 4 separate phases. At the Command Strategy Conference, Zetor proposes this plan and arranges to use the 203rd to attack the rear of Republican forces. The Empire carries out a widespread disinformation campaign as the first phase of Operation Fog and Sun to trick Republican forces into a large-scale Imperial retreat. Rugen tells Tanya that the plan for the second phase, Operation Shock and Awe, is to take out the Republican Command headquarters and their communication systems. Shugel announces that a new high-speed rocket weapon, the V-1, will transport the 203rd to the 3 potential locations of the enemy headquarters. Meanwhile, on the Rhine, Imperial troops retreat from the front, resulting in the confident advance of the Republican forces. Unbeknownst to them, the Imperial army left booby traps while retreating. Su is shown to have survived, and he is seen to be traveling on an Allied Kingdom ship and plotting his revenge on Tanya. Following the success of Operation Shock and Awe, the 203rd proceeds to retreat via submarine. At the Imperial High Council, various military leaders undergo grilling by government officials on their strategy of withdrawal, accused of exposing Imperial manufacturing facilities to potential Republican attack. They delay their response, stalling for time while they wait for Tanya's unit to report on their status. Finally, Zetor announces to the Imperial High Council that the enemy command structure has been destroyed, and the commencement of the 3rd phase of Operation Lockpick. It starts with the detonation of traps left behind by the retreating Imperial army, resulting in widespread Republican losses. Without communications, the Republican forces are in disarray and suffer a sustained counterattack by Imperial heavy armor and mechanized infantry, which completely encircle the Republican forces. During an investigation into the cause of the communications breakdown, Bento arrives at the ruins of the Republican Army's headquarters and is horrified. The 203rd takes part in the 4th phase of Operation Revolving Door, a series of mop-up operations against the Republican Army remnants, but suddenly comes under attack from an Allied Kingdom mage unit with long-range weapons led by Su. The diminished 203rd goes on the offensive rather than retreating. They use their altitude advantage but suffer heavy losses, especially when the Sioux use a magically enhanced trench gun. She then recognizes him from their previous encounter, but he is possessed by being X and grabs her. Victoria helps Tanya break free, and Tanya empties an entire magazine into Su, penetrating his magical defenses. Riddled with bullets, he detonates an explosive, but Tanya and Victoria resist the blast, just as a battalion of Imperial reinforcements arrive and chase off the Allied Kingdom mages. It is shown that while injured, most of the 203rd have survived. After the severe losses suffered by Republican forces because of Operation Revolving Door, the Republican army abandoned Paris, resulting in Imperial forces moving in and occupying the city. The Imperial High Council congratulates the military on their success and discusses the acquisition of the Republic's colonies. While the men of the 203rd celebrate on a Republican beach, Tanya and Victoria discuss the end of the war, and Tanya suspects the Republic is planning to evacuate by sea to prepare for a counteroffensive. She requests permission to attack the Republican military port of Brest, but it is refused, and she is also prevented from undertaking her own reconnaissance. She bemoans this opportunity to end the war. While the Empire celebrates the truce that could finally lead to an armistice and so to the end of the war, Tanya explains to Rurugan her being aware of the fact that it is only a matter of time for the war to restart, since the Republic and all other nations will never allow the Empire to become the most powerful country in Europe. But more so, refusing to admit defeat and choosing to keep fighting no matter the consequences is simply part of human nature. In fact, the Empire's overwhelming growth finally pushes the remaining superpowers of the world, the Allied Kingdom, the Rusi Federation, and the United States, to form an alliance against the Empire. When General Lugo of the Republican Army proclaims the birth of the Free Republic of Tunis, it becomes clear to the Empire citizens and soldiers that the war is far from over. While the battles begin once again, Tanya and her squad are sent to Africa to begin the fight against the Free Republic. While haranguing her men, Tanya tells them that the war is proof that God has failed, and that the power to influence mankind is now in the hands of man, and especially of the soldiers, once again launching her challenge against Being X. Meanwhile, in the United States, Mary Sue, blessed with Being X's power, enlists in the US Army in search of Tanya, seeking vengeance for her father's death. And that's the end of the video. As always, if you liked what you saw, subscribe to the channel. I'll be uploading a lot of videos just like this, so I'll see you at the next one.